holding on to me to make sure I didn't fall off the boat, which was actually quite sweet of him. Yeah, while I was on the Isle of Mull, I saw many of these birds, and it remains to this day the best trip of my life. Of course, this is their range in Scotland, but just here is where they were reintroduced in 2019. And now the next animal I'm going to show you all is one probably our largest land carnivore. It is the badger. Now, badgers are in the weasel family. In fact, they're the largest member. Well, they're the largest member of the weasel family in the British Isles. And they're known characteristically by their black and white face and their grey body. Yeah, and of course, they're also mostly nocturnal, which means they're active at night, and they aren't just carnivores. In fact, they are also they're mostly omnivores, which means they eat pretty much anything from fruit to insects, insect larvae, earthworms, and even small mammals like rats, mice, and rabbits. And of course, they usually live in dens under the ground, which are called setts. And of course, they don't have very good eyesight, but they have a very, very keen sense of smell and hearing. And of course, they're not dangerous to humans at all unless they're frightened, feel cornered, or are protecting cubs. A lot of the time, they just run away. But even so, because I've actually seen badgers multiple times when I was growing up, because where my grandparents live down in Yeovil, they live on the edge of a woodland that has badgers in it, and I've actually watched the badgers feeding in their garden every night, and I actually got to film the badgers in their garden, but of course that's another video on the channel. But still, I really would not advise trying to give one a hug because, as I said, these are in the weasel family and they have ferocious claws and teeth and they can be very, very aggressive. And there's no doubt if I was to try and give a badger a hug, it would probably shred me and I'd need to go to the hospital to get stitched up. And of course, badgers are also one of the most threatened animals in Britain because for many years now they've been suffering because they're quite often blamed for outbreaks of bovine TB or tuberculosis, and that results in what are called badger culls, where they basically wipe out a whole set of badgers, and that is absolutely idiotic and does nothing to help prevent the spread of tuberculosis in cattle. And in fact, it's thanks to badger pioneers like Brian May and even Chris Packham and David Attenborough that badgers are now being protected in Britain, and there's actually vaccinations for TB being given to badgers to try and prevent the spread of TB to cattle, but a lot of the time it's not the badgers that are to blame. Although badgers are vulnerable in much of Britain, they are closely monitored by the British Wildlife Trust, and of course people rarely see them because they're very shy, very elusive, and they're mostly active at night, and a lot of the time they don't attack you unless they feel cornered, or frightened, or are protecting cubs. And a lot of the time, if they either hear you or smell you, they just turn tail and run away. Of course, here is their range in Britain. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is probably our most famous songbird. It is the robin. robins are a very popular bird in Britain. In fact, the British robin is actually a very different character to its European counterpart. On the continent, the bird is shy and retiring, but on this side of the channel, he regularly follows a gardener hoping for worms and will even hop up to a familiar hand to take seeds. And that has helped the robin hold a special place in the heart of British people. But also, robins became popular in the Victorian era when they became a symbol of the festive season. When they first appeared on Christmas cards in the Victorian era to represent the red tunic-wearing postman of the day. Of course, here in the UK, we can hear the robins sung all year round, but that's mainly because of its territorial behaviour. Because the male robin, a cock, will quite often sing to proclaim and defend his territory, and if the warning is ignored, they will fight, and it can be to the death. And the hen robin, the female, does quite often, when the male has attracted her to his territory, they both have to work together to keep their territory guarded through winter for when spring comes around. Of course, when it's breeding season, the female will build a nest that's mostly made of dead leaves, moss, and with twigs with a hair lining, and they usually have more than 1 or 2 broods in a season. And robins are actually very well known for their inventiveness. They don't just nest in trees and hedges, they've quite often been known to nest in hanging baskets, kettles, old wellies, and even sheds or car bonnets. But robins are very sensitive to disturbance, and they will abandon a nest if they think it has been discovered. So if you ever do find a robin nest, be sure to make sure to leave no sign of your disturbance. But also, robins quite often struggle in winter, because the winter time is very difficult for them because they have to fight against their most lethal enemies: cold, hunger, and disease. And of course, to fight against the cold, they quite often fluff up their feathers to give it an almost puffball appearance. But of course, fortunately, they do come to feeders or bird tables, and they can survive on nuts and seeds that are left out by humans, but also our kitchen scraps, such as cheese and bacon rind, can also help them get through the winter. But of course, their natural diet is mostly earthworms, beetles, or other insects and invertebrates, and they will bring those back to their nests to feed their young. And another thing I forgot to mention about the robin, and it's being a symbol of the festive season, is that they first appeared on Christmas cards in the Victorian era. Well, I've already mentioned that bit, but it's actually a couple of stories in the Bible about robins. I mean, the first one being about the birth of Christ, when the robin tried to help Mary and Joseph keep a fire going, and it stood too close to the flames and burned its chest. But also, with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, it's said that a robin actually he perched on his shoulder and got pricked by the crown of thorns, and that gave it its red chest. Another thing about robins is that robin chicks need parental care even after they've fledged, and that's quite often where the male steps in to lend a hand. And of course, then the female will quite often focus then on raising the next generation. And robins aren't endangered or vulnerable in Britain. In fact, there are thousands of them here in Britain, and they're always a very welcome sight on Christmas cards, but also to see in your garden. And to this day, they are some of the most beloved and familiar garden birds of Britain. Of course, here is their range. And now, the final animal I'm going to show you is probably our most endangered and most elusive predator. It is the pine marten. Now, pine martens are in the weasel family. They look a little bit like a ferret, but they're bigger, and of course they have dark brown fur with usually a yellowish creamy throat. And of course, like all members of the weasel family, they are fearless and ferocious predators that will take on animals many times their own size. But, and this is actually a shout out to fans of Philip Pullman, since Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy was made into a TV series, then pine marten has become more popular because Pantalaimon, or Pan, who is Lyra Silvertongue's spirit demon, settles in the form of a pine marten, and that's one reason why they've become more popular. Because pine martens were once widespread across Britain, but unfortunately in the Victorian era they were hunted to extinction for their fur. And now one of the only places they're found in is Scotland, right in the north of England, of Britain, But of course, they have recently been reintroduced to parts of England and Wales, and that's one of the main reasons for that is because of grey squirrels, and grey squirrels cause a lot of problems for red squirrels. They outcompete them and pass on squirrel parks, but it's actually been shown that pine martens prey on grey squirrels more than red squirrels, and they actually have been knocking down the population of grey squirrels and allowing the red squirrels to increase even more. And that's one reason why they're being reintroduced to the rest of Britain. And as you can see here, this is a pine marten skull. They have very long canine teeth and stout carnassials or cheek teeth at the side of the jaw. And there's no doubt that a pine marten could probably take off a couple of my fingers with a single bite. But, I have never seen a pine marten before, and you could probably spend your entire life living in pine marten territory, which is, as you guessed it, mostly coniferous forest made up with lots of pine trees, hence their name. You could probably spend your entire life living in their territory without coming across a pine marten because they're very shy and very elusive and mostly nocturnal, so they're very difficult to find. But with the reintroductions to the rest of Britain, hopefully they could increase in population, and they can try and knock down the populations of grey squirrels and allow red squirrels to return. There's hope for doing that. Of course, here is much of their range. As you can see, their stronghold is still here in Scotland, but they have spread down right into northern England, and they've been reintroduced to Wales and right here in southern England. So they are slowly going to hopefully make a comeback in Britain. Right, that has been my presentation on 20 animals of Great Britain. As I have mentioned before in a few of my previous videos, that I will be remaking some of my PowerPoint presentations because of a few issues I ran into with them previously. But if you liked this video, well, this PowerPoint presentation, please drop a comment down below, but also do check out my other videos. Thank you.